Hi, Alexander. I would like to welcome you to our first recording of the initial podcast. Of course, this is the series and starting a new adventure for me as well. It's my first recorded podcast, and I would like to maybe can you tell us a little bit about you and about the Data Masterclass and introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure. I'm Alex. I have built a number of data and AI organizations in the past. Spent a bit of time, half a decade at Volkswagen Group, another half a decade at Zalando. Very different environments. One very traditional, but a lot of brands, very big globally. Where I was helping actually, over 10 years ago, I was helping to really have data and AI set up in each of the brands: Audi, Porsche, Skoda, Seat. Skoda is here, of course, in Prague. We're close in Vladislav.
Yeah.
And at Zalando, I had the opportunity to come in, to really help Zalando at that time. It was an incredible data and AI innovation-driven company, but it was also going to the point where it was completely crazy. It was so much innovation that everyone was running and creating things, and we had with 60,000 dashboards, 2 data lakes with petabytes of data and so on, and nobody could find anything anymore, unless you know somebody. And so when I came in, basically, we created the Zalando Data Foundation, a team of nearly 200 people who actually, created at the center, structure into this whole data process and AI process, and was working with 600 people who had data and AI in their job titles to actually, create something solid together. And so 2 very, very different experiences, that I would shape me the last decade most in terms of data and AI leadership. And my mission has been always to, I think it's very similar, we're very much alike here, was to actually bring kind of data and AI into the heart of the companies, So it's not a side topic, but it's really that it determines how people work inside these companies. And I think that's why I also I did this with so much passion. These 5 years at Zalando, at Volkswagen and Zalando has been very, very intense for me. But there was always this big purpose, and I saw traction. I could see that if you put a lot of energy into it, things change. People start to work differently, and there's something embedded into the culture, which is a very magical moment. And so, I was still at Data Masterclass when I asked myself, what do I want to do with my life later on, kind of. And then I thought, I took really some time for reflection. And then, I thought it would be really cool to do these transformations, not only one transformation every 5 years, but how about 20 transformations in 1 year, or even more,
Yep.
And this is how we came up with the idea of a community, of an ecosystem, a transformative ecosystem, what Data Masterclass is. We are uniting data and AI leaders from more than 8 countries. We are very proud to have, you guys, Jaroslav, you as the new chapter lead of Data Masterclass here in Prague and in Czech Republic, because I think you kind of exactly bring this spirit, with what you create here with Joyful Craftsmen is amazing. I think you build that local spirit, this transformative ecosystem already locally, and we're kind of combining with the forces here to drive that, because I think we all believe that we can actually make AI work in Europe, actually, and in our way. Maybe it's a different way than others would do it, and I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I think that really resonates with me because that's why we started the whole the data leaders community here in Prague, where I was exactly missing this part of, I call it education. I see that, all of the leaders are educating somehow themselves. They are following the trends, they are reading articles, but at some point they are missing some of the structured way how to move forward, or they are a bit lost, exactly in this thousands of dashboards and initiatives and roles and titles. And I think I'm very happy that we are binding our forces together and kind of bringing it and moving this whole ecosystem forward. And I see, we are both trying to approach the data and AI leaders to do this transformation. And the topic, of today's podcast is to think about how AI is actually influencing not just the companies in general, but the data teams and the various roles, in those data teams. And maybe why do you think, are these, data agents, an important topic, and why it's so important, why it's being talked so much about recently?
And you touched the topic of transformation, and of course, in 2026, AI agents is the transformative force, not only in data and AI, but for the economy, for the world, you could say. And it's changing lives. It's changing also private lives. People are using it privately as well. It's not only in companies. And we often forget that, like when data and AI leaders, and we're working with a lot, and we've been all like also in different kind of data and AI leadership roles, and we often forget when we drive transformation inside the business and inside the company that actually transformation starts with ourselves as leaders, because the world around us is changing, and that is true in 2026 as it has not been before in my lifetime. I've been in this space for over 20 years, and I have not seen this happening so far.
Yeah.
And so transformation starts with you as a data and AI leader, and then with the teams. Because the data and AI teams also need to change. And then, of course, it's the board who looks at the business. A lot of business people are questioning themselves, like, okay, today I do following things in sales. Would that be the same with the same people? Like, those are all things that we don't have clear answers yet. Like we've as data and AI leaders, we want to find out, hey, what do you need as sales, as production, as logistics? But those business leaders, look at us as much as we look at them to find these answers. And so I guess the topic of AI agents is such a big transformative topic because it changes everything. It changes what we do in the business, how we work in the business, who we need in the business, but it's also changing who do I need to be as a data and AI leader? Yeah. What does my team need to do? And you all know that, you're working day to day with so many companies, and you see that. What is happening right now is something that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, and I see. I think you had one very good point. We have to start the transformation, with ourselves as a leaders, and I think this is the one important aspect when you look at the current data leaders or the CDOs or the heads of data, heads of AI. What do you think are the most patterns, where the people change, and what is maybe a bit hype that they are following, and what do you see that the change is happening and will stay and or maybe being enforced, with the more and more practical application of the agents within the data teams?
I think it's something that actually I think you and Josef came up with. It was something that I also see. When boards look at their data and AI teams, they say, you guys have 30 people, 50 people, 100 people. Now we can vibe code, which means 10x. So I have a team of 1,000 people, kind of, like 500 people. And so the expectation towards data and AI leaders is that they are the first ones to apply AI and show the others how it's done by applying it to themselves, because you need to eat your own dog food, because otherwise nobody believes you. As we all know from practice, and I'm curious to hear your experiences right now, it's not a journey from, like even if you're a very strong team, so we, for example, one of the companies in our community and a number of leaders from that company in our community, Data Masterclass community, is SumUp. SumUp is a scale-up company in the payments world. In a lot of restaurants in Europe, you see these SumUp machines, where you can pay, or like also in shops. And they have started their Gen AI journey already in 2023. And they had last year major very complex multi-agent systems, for example, for regulatory compliance in place, in production for regulatory purposes, replacing the work of 30 people because they had to, because they didn't have the money to hire those 30 people to do paperwork like banks would, because, and so they had to become very creative. And so yesterday I talked with one of the leaders, who's one of the AI leaders in the company, and she told me, look, we expected to do 10x, because we started so early, maybe we can do 3x, but we cannot do 10x yet. It's possible, but there's a journey, and I think this very nicely kind of shows where we are, why it is so hard. And at the same time, you go to the business and say, hey, what do you need? And they have no clue what they need. And so as a data and AI leader, people look at you to provide answers to these questions. So they're looking for a partner who can guide them through that. But it is far from trivial, because you're not necessarily a sales and marketing expert. You're not a logistics expert. You're not an HR expert. So there's deep kind of transformational work needed. And there's almost like a gap, because the leaders of these functions in most companies are not ready for that as well, So as a data and AI leader, you need to navigate that space somehow. You've probably seen that. Yep. And some do better than others. And those who tend to come from the business, they tend to do that slightly better than the ones who've been always in tech. The very tech profiles struggle in such a world where it's really about business transformation. And so I guess that's kind of the picture we're in. And there's actually one more thing, and I don't know if you noticed that as well, We talked today a lot about making data, making everything AI ready, AI ready data, AI ready platform, and so on. I just talked recently, I think 2 weeks ago, with a CEO, and he told me, the last 5 to 10 years I was investing in the AI ready stuff. Where's my AI readiness? Yeah. So I think what data and AI leader also needs to face is a little bit of mistrust these days, And sometimes it's inherited because you came in last year. Yeah. But sometimes you've been there 5 years ago. In any case, there's mistrust with regards to that, because we are telling the business now, hey, we need to clean up, we need to have data products, we need to have AI platform, and they say, where's my money? What have you done the last 10 years? Yeah. I don't know if it resonates with you, if you see similar things, but that's what we see with a lot of members.
Right? Yeah, I see it. I think what I see, and maybe that's specific to the Czech ecosystem or the Czech and Slovak ecosystem, like there are still not just, like the companies were investing into these areas, they are lacking actually this, they are lacking some, like the basics, even like kind of the proper environment where to set up proper kind of, the approach, the methodology, and so on. So I see it maybe a little bit differently, and it as well depends, when I talk to big banks and the big companies that have the money, they are investing into these areas. But when I see it more on a wider space, then still there is a lot of companies who is missing, even the fundamentals. But when I think about it, me as being a data and AI leader, and I need to educate myself, I think where it needs to happen, it needs to have some trust. And I think I think as well the companies are somehow lacking certain parts where you have these great engineers, you can give them tools and they kind of try it out. But I think we as leaders have to experiment with it a bit more. When I think about, okay, how am I working on a general practice? How am I learning? How am I following, the various information? Even for that, leveraging that AI kind of, right now it's recently talked a lot about, building the second brain and kind of the information of what's happening within the company. I think this is the kind of first step where even the leader has to maybe pull up the sleeves, maybe log himself for a few more weeks, not to be bothered, to kind of, be exposed to those areas, or where I see it's as well very successful, where those leaders are, for example, supporting hackathons or supporting these kind of, initiatives. Yeah. But the biggest transformation I see within those leaders when they actually go there, sit there and do it. And they kind of maybe go a few years back to all of those disciplines they were doing in the past. But then they see, okay, this is something really, changing. And I have much bigger belief. And then I'm kind of maybe somewhere we have to start to build basics. Maybe somewhere we have to build something. But this is something I see among the leaders, that they have to really kind of pick up and not just to sit around and wait until, whatever clever engineer from my team brings something, because they will bring something, but usually they don't have this connection towards the business or the trust, from the board or from the senior management to kind of pull it further.
And it's a very high burden right now on data and AI leaders, because you need to do all that coalition building, like a number of, like I remember like when we came in 1.5 years ago as coaches to a larger kind of e-com company, and the data and AI team was brilliantly technically, but they struggled to get traction with the stakeholders, and like the stakeholders basically said, like, what you built doesn't work for us. Like there was a lot of huge mistrust, disappointment, and so on. Like drama, a little bit of drama, to be honest. Although they had really good stack, and a lot of things were really nice place, and the engineers were excellent, absolutely excellent. And so we digged into that. We did some work with the new leader, and the first thing we actually recreated was that trust, and we helped the leader, to recreate the trust with the major business functions and the analyst teams and analyst leaders in these functions, and also the business leaders, because from there, like, first of all, like, listening and sitting down and understanding problems, that's already a big step forward, because like whatever you do, people think you listen to them. That's already good. And there's more re-engagement again happening, but also that is so important, because then you can really address the problems. Because very often, if you're too much in your data and AI bubble, you make assumptions of what the business needs, and it turned out really that the data and that the people in the business couldn't leverage the data as it was for what they needed, because their tools were not for that skill level that they were there. So there was a simple. You've seen that probably several times. And so through that dialogue and through that coalition building, we created then kind of almost like virtual teams that started to look at how should we design it so it actually works. And what happened then is, like, within 6 months after the coalition was built, because half a year we had to understand the problems, rebuild the trust. It was like almost like starting from new, like, but there was again hope. There was like belief, and then within 6 months they completely changed the entire data platform in a way that it's using AI and it's super self-service oriented, and basically it's so much more usable by the business. All the data is documented. They used AI to document the data and so on, because they understood really what they need. And they collaborated to create it, because they could have never done it on their own. And I think all of that kind of coalition building, understanding, getting this feel for the organization, you have to do while, and this is where the leader was really great at, what the leader actually found out what actually already works in AI in the data stack. And like you have to also at the same time kind of change your approach, your tooling, change your team, to do that. And doing that at the same time, and this is what most data and AI teams currently are facing, is the hard bit.
Yeah, actually what I had one more question, because we are both kind of people who consult various companies and the data leaders and so on. And I know it even from myself, I have the tendency to talk about things, but some of them, you really have to get your hands on. So what is your thing? How did you, for example, use, some of the AI stuff to improve your kind of skill set or your approach, to this whole problem, whether it comes to building trust or understanding the clients or understanding teams and so on. Like, do you have some tips, for the listeners of our podcast, what they could think about?
Yeah, I think the challenge right now is that the world has changed so fast, also technology-wise, that what you learned as a data and AI leader, since the time you've been hands-on, has changed so much that it's very important to get hands-on again. And I actually did that. We did that in my data masterclass actually. And so we started two projects which really helped. One was we installed OpenClaw and use that as our research multi-agent system, for research, going to Medium, to a Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan and MIT Technology Review, to O'Reilly, and pulling, like, pretending that it's me and pulling pulling different information basically together as input for research, basically. Almost like I would read a book, but finding me out where do I need to tap into, which O'Reilly book currently has the stuff that I need to read, so I could go there, or the Medium article. And then kind of preparing FAQs for a topic. So I basically say, give me 50 FAQs on context layer for agents, and it really goes into the latest articles, into these paid things, and puts together like a list of, and I don't tell which questions I have, and it creates like 50, 100 FAQ questions, and it's super precisely answered, like it's to the point and it's accurate, and this is amazing, because we would, before, we had to do 2 months of research for any of such things, and spend time and money with our coaches on that, and so on, and so that was very, very powerful. And for me, this was very eye-opening, this process of cooking, of setting up, OpenClaw in a way that it's connected to all the systems. And I mean, for me, this was like something that has not changed, is that all the interfaces cost you the most time. Connecting things, we connected to Trello, to Teams, to Notion, to different, pieces, to Canva, to all the tools that we use. And so that was kind of an eye-opening. And then it was very interesting to create, your own multi-agent systems that have to check, create good output. And that's kind of a little bit of a learning path to go there. And so I find it very, very fascinating. But what I found even more fascinating was we then also built, the last few weeks, our entire operating system new with Cloud Code. Because we got sick to have like all these 10 different tools disconnected. And when you wanted to do KPIs, when you wanted to do a workflow, when you wanted to reply to messages, everything was either manual and scattered and so on. And so we put everything into this system. And it's so fast, how fast you can build something with a database in the background, with a Postgres in the background, pulling from all the APIs and from all your existing data. And we cleaned up all our master data within 2 weeks. Before it was a major problem, because you start using this tool and this tool, and you have different customer data from events, from our kind of coaching work and so on, and so that was also very fascinating. So what surprised me is, with Cloud Code in particular, is how stable and robust it is. Because a lot of people say, you do, and within 1 week you build it, and then 3 weeks you test it. And I think that's information from maybe 5 months ago. And now I would say the ratio is becoming small. Of course, in enterprise, you still need to make it production ready, but I think it's not as far as it used to be. I don't know what your experiences are, but it's incredible. And I talked actually yesterday to somebody who had 1 year, like he used to be a head of data. She's head of AI, and he used to do data science work, And the last year he did, she swapped. He hasn't programmed a single line of code anymore. He told me he started to use it, and he saw it works, and he used it more and more, and he's not coding anymore.
I think it's a very good example. From my perspective, I think I'm still lagging a bit behind personally, but where I used it, it's exactly on this information research and kind of gathering and kind of bring some insights, but as well on processing, because I do a lot of consulting areas where you come to the company, you have to do kind of the discovery within the company, and there I started to kind of fully record the things, get the transcript, get the kind of insights, and rather than working on creating the whatever output, rather than to see, okay, what output it reviewed based on my knowledge, my practices, which I feed into the system, and then it gives me some examples, and then I can spend more on thinking critically, is it really good example, a good way forward, and maybe kind of having more discussions with the stakeholders that I interview rather than preparing the documents. And I think this was really, how to say, moving me forward personally in these consultings. And then the second thing where I see it, where I'm lagging a bit, is within our team, because we are as well introducing kind of the AI agents coding, Claude Code, GitHub Copilot, whatever tooling. We kind of said, hey, let's open it.
Yeah.
Anybody has access, to that kind of tooling, and they have to sit, and they are sitting and kind of working and progressing in there. And maybe I will move towards the second topic I wanted to talk about, and that's people. Because it's always, you see a lot of discussions, is it Claude Code or is it OpenClaw, or are we going to use, GitHub Copilot, whatever, the tooling. But I think where really we as leaders have to think is the teams, we have around. And you mentioned it as well. Are we now going to have, 10 times or, even 3 times, we have 3 times such a big team? What are we going to achieve? Which roles are we going to address? So where do you see, which roles are being kind of changed the most significantly?
First of all, I would say that all roles are changing right now. And with all, I don't mean only technical roles. At the same time, it's not like changing in a way that they would necessarily disappear. I don't see that yet. Maybe we see these announcements, but you have to be very careful with these announcements. If people fire 20,000 people, you could ask also, maybe they simply didn't have a use for it. They overhired maybe in good times and so on. There are always some other factors. Because in realities in companies, what I see is rather that people in companies usually are overworked. There's too much work to do. And people start to, and the existing people on existing roles start to do smart things with AI. And funnily, it's often the business who does it first these days, because they are usually on the time pressure. They have to bring sales figures. They have to do marketing, right? There's a lot of pressure from the management. So they think, how can I be more effective in my work? Let's use AI, and they start using it. And they uploading the Excel file into something, and they start doing things. So I would say probably the biggest change right now for everyone is that whatever you have done, now you kind of, your job is to think about how can AI fit into your workflow. I think that's probably the number one thing, and no matter of which role. It also means that that there is a slight tendency that we go more towards more generalist, because in the last years we've been always more specializing. And there's a clear tendency that we need more generalist roles, and let me give you an example. So one of the people in our community, they really, realize that actually, it doesn't make sense to have data scientists, data engineers, and so on. They simply consolidate into AI engineer. And these people need to be broader. But being broader is much easier if you are open to it, because AI can assist you in writing your pipelines and so on. So of course you need to have some tech background, but most data scientists have programmed in Python. Maybe they were not so good in creating production-ready code, but that is something that can be assisted. And so what we really see is that in the past, maybe you needed an MLOps, data scientist, analyst, data engineer, and maybe that's becoming a little more consolidated. And we rather expect people to be able to find the opportunities and identify how to actually make it work, Take full ownership of things. And so when I look at who's getting hired, we'll have a Data Masterclass community call this Friday on this topic, like what's happening with the job market for data and AI and data and AI leaders. We partnered up with a recruitment agency, with a headhunter who has been in the DACH market, in the German, Austria, Switzerland market, for recruiting data and AI roles for the past 10 years, like a market leader. Like they have been placing more roles than anyone else. And they were analyzing how the role placement has been shifted. They looked into their own database, and we did a mapping exercise with them. and you really see the shifts, like from data science to AI engineering. You see the shift that people are looking for the unicorn again, who can actually, automate businesses and is able to do that while talking to them, doing it hands-on. I think that's probably the most full stack AI engineers plus the people who can work closely with the business to think about how to automate stuff. Those are kind of the most seek people, and then maybe people who can build these monitoring systems and ensure production readiness of stuff, and those are really the roles that everyone looks for. So surprisingly, MLOps is still a very desired role right now, which surprised me a little bit because ML is kind of it seems to be dead.
Old.
But guess what? For agent ops, you also need kind of MLOps,
Yep.
and so.
No, I see it very similarly. I even saw that, like right now, all of these newest kind of inventions, they are running on the kind of the newest type of codes and models. But these models will kind of shift, and maybe you will have some kind of local model, not just for making predictions of your or customer or score risk ratings on your customers or something, but you will as well do the certain models that will help you to generate the code or work with the context and so on, and those will have to be tuned maybe a bit with the local teams, and so this ML setup will stay.
There's one actually more role I wanted to discuss, which is the product manager role. Because like one of the things we've been really doing a lot as coaches is helping to set up product management, proper product managers for data and AI. Sometimes simply when there, the team managers had also to do the product management. And in other situations, so we had an e-commerce company, we had a pharmaceutical company, we had a manufacturing company, and all of these teams, no matter which industry, and no matter how advanced kind of they are, there seems to be a gap. Because product managers are exactly the ones who go into the business, see what's the opportunity, how can I sell more using AI, kind of, how can I smoothen my manufacturing process, do better quality checks with AI inside the manufacturing process. That's what a product manager essentially does. And these roles were massively lacking. And so there was like literally for probably 10 organizations in the last 12 months, we've been helping them to either, enable their people to become that, or to hire people, the right skills, and get into operating models around product management. And so very often we had maybe somebody also like a product owner, Scrum-wise, who was still looking for somebody coming up with the ideas, And I think that time is over. I think we cannot act as IT service provider, in terms of like, or let me put it this way. I think also IT service provider models are changing because you're expected to come up with solutions, come up with ideas, come up with ideation, and not just, implement stuff.
Yeah. No, I see it very similarly, like the product owner role that is being more, I guess, I think more in general, like the data leaders should really look into their teams and to evaluate, the fit for purpose and what is in. They are exactly like asking what roles, where do I have the gaps and so on. And one thing is, and you named nicely, you either change these roles, or you get them, or change somebody, to have this role, or you hire them outside, to the company. And where I have kind of in the question, or what I was discussing, it's a lot of change management. And I think even the data leaders, they are, many times you come in and see, okay, how well are you, with change management in general. So do you have any tips and tricks, for the listeners of our podcast, how to approach it? Should I, really get skilled on it too much, or how to approach, the overall change, within the team? We are still within the team, the team has to adopt. Do you have any tips in this regard?
The first thing I would look as a coach, when I'm starting work with a coach, we don't do projects, but we kind of go into coaching relationships with people, is is that a problem? Is that really the problem? You know, like, and usually you see it's a problem when you have products built that are actually quite nice, like in this case study that I gave, you know, like the real member experience that I gave you before, but people don't adopt these products. Or you have the wrong type of products, you know, or, you know, like, or you have products and people use it, but the benefits are not there. All of these kind of are kind of signs that, you know, either product management or change management is missing, or most of the time both, you know.
Yeah.
And what we tried often to do is, let's build up data literacy programs. Let's hire somebody for data culture. And we don't see that working very well. This can help, and I would not be against hiring somebody, but at the end, it's a top leadership mission to drive this change, you know, and that includes the data and AI leader, but it includes also the other business leaders to together drive the change, you know, each one in their vertical and working together. So such a data culture team, no matter if it's in HR under the data and AI leader or jointly, they can assist those leaders to drive the change, but ultimately the leaders need to own that change. Yeah. You cannot delegate that. And also as a CEO, and one of the most important things, and maybe this is the kind of the hack, is delegate upwards. Usually there's a CEO who would be willing to help if they knew how. And, you know, maybe they cannot invest much time, but if you give them, let me give you a story from my time at Volkswagen Group. You know, when I was there, we were running, I think, data initiative across the group-wide initiative across the brands. And part of that was a lot of things to you know, start building up teams, foundations, etc., use cases. And one of that was really education. So what we brought in together all the you know, representatives from the different brands, because we wanted to create a community, because change is a lot also about community, you know, because if you want to scale, like, the group is too big, you know, you have headquarters in 12 different large companies, they have a lot of markets, 47 markets usually around, you know, worldwide, so you have to find these multipliers. So we flew them in, and I managed to I simply ask, you know, our CEO, Matthias Müller at the time, of the entire group, hey, can you come? And we give you something to read out around, like, why this is important, you know, why data and AI is important, why we need to invest, why this is so important that we are there, you know, and talk basically to them about it. He came, you know, he spent an hour even with us, you know, and you know, and it was and maybe out of that hour, you know, 15 minutes was really 10 minutes was kind of his speech, but I think afterwards, simply his presence, he sat down, instead of just going, he sat down and he listened to the next presentation of the chief digital officer, of our strategy, for like the rest of the hour. And that was an incredibly important sign, because if you think about a person who manages 600,000 people globally, 625,000 people globally, they have lots to do. It was after the diesel scandal. There was a lot of things to do. But that was a sign to everyone else, hey, this is important. This is an important part of our culture change. We want to drive this. You know, and so I would say my number one kind of tip would be activate your CEO and your other C-levels to help you in this. And just show them how, give them simply means to do it.
Yep. Thanks.
Writing emails is simple, giving messages is simple, you know, like...
Yeah, I think that's very important, you know, really having the support, you know, from top management, you know, to do these transformations. As well, you know, from really, as you said, you know, each leader is responsible then for his own team. So then, of course, you have to look into your team and see who are kind of the supporters, you know, of the change, and who are maybe some laggards, and kind of support the overall change, you know, within our team, not just, you know, throughout the organization, but all of this kind of management supports gives this additional kick and additional support. And
And you can feel it, don't you? Like when you go into some place, you can feel the management support is not there or not, I guess.
Oh, it has totally different vibe or the totally different kind of thing. And I actually wanted to move to our last part of our talk today or of our podcast, which is more on the organization. And you mentioned it many times, we have the pressure, the people come in, they are asking, the business leaders are asking, the data leaders, how this comes from. Do you see any particular role that is most active in this area?
So,
if you see any particular role which is, challenging the data leaders to, become more efficient, if it's their direct leader, like the head of data, or it depends where they are sit. Of course, the data leader can sit under business, under IT, under CEO directly, and so on. So if you see like who is kind of the most eager to see or creates the biggest pressure, and maybe why so? Because I think many times for us it's very important to understand the pressure, not just that it comes from somewhere, but maybe what are the reasons they are asking such questions.
So with one of our members, we did. So it's an SVP data and AI in a e-commerce company, and he asked us to do an offsite for 2 days, with his board, and the reason for that was because there was a lot of unchecked expectations, because they read newspapers, and because their shareholders want everything AI. Which is totally understandable, because you read everything is possible. Like every day you read on LinkedIn, you read newspapers, Harvard Business Review, everyone is doing AI like crazy. The shareholders ask you for that. And at the same time, it's very hard for them to verify what is actually feasible, what not. Plus, just asking for AI is not the solution. You need to think through where exactly. And that cannot come just from the data and AI team. And if you do that, if you delegate it too much down the hierarchy, you will come up with ideas, but those are not the bold ideas. Those are not the big bets, the big AI bets that you need. And so we really spent 2 days with them to figure this out. And funny enough, the first half day, they just asked us questions. And I can tell you, the first questions were quite aggressive. It was like in a press conference with paparazzi, where they ask questions like why do people still need so much time for anything? Like why is this? Why is that? Like why do we need to invest in data when we have AI? And all these questions were very reasonable. And well, we were there with 3 coaches, and there was a director and SVP, from their end, and the CTO, and all of us. We just very patiently responded to one question at a time, and then and you see also through that, the pressures, where it's coming from, because the supervisor board wants fast AI everywhere. The board wants fast AI everywhere. They don't know where, and they don't know that it actually takes what it takes to actually make it work, and spending 2 days and explain, and then we basically took them through, we took them through, first of all, where do you see the opportunities? And they came up for half a day, they worked out what's their AI roadmap. Then we together helped them to create a data roadmap for that AI roadmap, because they understood, we need data for that. The context is everything for these agents. And then we showed them everything that is needed in terms of AI readiness. And the internal director working in the company, he actually showed where we are right now, what everything is already built out, which was great, because we had like traffic lights, and it was very transparent. And for them, they felt very confident, because they know, okay, this is already working, this is already working, this is already working. These pieces we're still working, but it's tackled. We have a plan for this, and we have a committed, and we have an AI roadmap which everyone in the room believes in, a data roadmap that everyone believes in. And that created incredible alignment and momentum, and it felt like a team, like before it was like,
all dragged it together.
Yeah, before it was like this pressure, hey, why don't you, like I have this pressure from the shareholders, why can't you deliver faster? And now it felt like, everyone is now an AI leader. And so So I think this needs to happen, because the other thing that might also happen, which is not so good for data and AI leaders, is that the business loses faith and loses trust and loses patience. And because it's possible, they just take external vendors plus vibe coding and they build their own solution. And this is happening everywhere right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other pressure, because I'm thinking of one of the leaders, we work in logistics, and she has the pressure that the business does that, and her team needed to learn also agentic, and so now it's like a race, and that's also another pressure, because you need then also to win that race kind of, because otherwise you're not legible.
Yeah, exactly. To move from the kind of just a cost center to really be a partner and have the capabilities in there. Right? And I actually had one question I wanted to ask you. Where do you see exactly makes sense to handle the change internally, and when to bring an external vendor or external partner? You already mentioned it. Sometimes the business loses the patience, they bring it in. Sometimes it can be even the IT team bringing somebody to help them show that we have this kind of capabilities within the team. If you have seen any kind of patterns or how the leaders can think about it, when to engage somebody internally or externally.
I think this is an excellent question, and I believe that it always makes sense to bring somebody or bring different pieces from outside as well, because otherwise you're in your own kind of bubble. At the very least, and this is sometimes where because it's so stressful, the jobs, at the very least you need to come and join some communities and understand what's going on, because otherwise you're just trying to reinvent the wheel of maybe something that somebody else has completely solved, like you figure out your own way. We've seen that, people are staying in their own bubble, and so in general I would say, like, go out and learn from others and bring in people who bring experience to do things. And as I say that, I think the other key message would be here: bring in people who help your team to become better, rather than a team that does things for you and leaves. And so, and that can be on all levels. It can be, coaches, but it can be also implementation partners who implement something with you, but also trains up your team. Because, like, you bring in externals, so you accelerate your learning journey. If you bring in externals to just accelerate your implementation journey, and it does nothing to your learning journey, you're building up organizational debt that is enormous, like, after they leave, and you kind of rob the team of a chance to ever get into this, because once you lose the train, you lose the train. And so that's kind of where I sometimes get a little bit worried, I would say. I would say is this, that there are traditional companies, both in strategy consulting and also implementation consulting, larger ones, that try to say, hey, no worries, CEO, I do AI transformation for you, sign this 10-year deal, I will do everything. Because I don't think that works in today's world. And I think these times are over, and people know it, and we see it also in the numbers of these companies and so on. And I think what they need is more ecosystem players like you guys, who can actually, rock it with them as a partner.
This is actually one of the parts where we are really trying to stay open, and that's why we have the community kind of bringing the data leaders in to have these ideas, bringing the people, even we are running as well like a technical communities, where people are exchanging, but as well when we come to a client, it's like it's not our intellectual property, it's yours. And we are helping you to accelerate and kind of upskill the teams you have. And of course, we know when there is a big demand, then you need to help out with the team. When there is a lower demand, then of course, the team can handle it internally. And that's, I think, the business that is going to stay here. I think we are almost up to our time, and I would like to have one more closing question. we are now launching, kind of our cooperation with the Czech chapter of Data Masterclass and so on. But
it's the first chapter. We're gonna launch several, but this is history because you're the first one.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be part of the journey, and was wondering where the people can find more things about Data Masterclass. Where you are most active, or where are we going to be most active? I can add from the Czech chapter perspective, but you can as well add, from the global chapter perspective.
So like once again, we're so extremely happy about having you as a partner here and as a chapter lead, organizing here in the Czech Republic and Prague, because I think what you bring to the table is exactly what we live at Data Masterclass, which is this ecosystem thinking, is about really learning what works, supporting people, and like you can feel it, like it's very authentic. And I mean, this is what we're all about. Creating a community in a space where people can transform themselves and learn how to transform others, and this is needed because we need a lot of leadership in the upcoming years. And so the best point to start actually is we have once a year we bring the entire community across Europe together. And that's on June 9th to 11th. We have Data Masterclass Europe. Just go to our website, datamasterclass.com, and you find a link to DME 2026 there. And so Data Masterclass Europe 2026, it's 3 days, 100 data and AI leaders, 8 countries. Usually we always have 8 countries or more, and from all kind of very, very interesting companies. And I think the great thing about it, I mean, there's lots of events out there, but we really for 3 days go very deep in 6 workshops. And it's not in parallel. There's one workshop at a time where we really solve together one problem at a time. So this year will be, how to set up a context layer for your AI. It will be like, what's your transformation kind of narrative, and roadmap for AI and data and data readiness for AI. What's your AI ready architecture? So we're gonna really look, and every year, like the ambition has been, it's the 4th time in a row we're doing it. It's in Berlin. We are running in a way that you learn everything that you need to know as a data and AI leader, almost like as an update, based on all the experience we collect from all the leaders globally often, what actually works, what doesn't work, and then we started the local chapters, and so we're gonna do something very interesting together as well this year. Maybe you want to.
I can announce that we will be hosting as well like a local data masterclass in September. So we will announce all that soon. We will even bring a small glimpse of this data masterclass in our June event too. So we would really want to have that, and I think still. We are planning to keep the community, the Joy Data leaders still want to keep that community and kind of have these gatherings kind of 3 times per year to have these exchanges. But most likely, or not most likely, we definitely will look into how to enhance them and bring most of these structured content and the insights and researches and the areas that can help the leaders to improve and help to do their jobs better.
Yeah, and you will be also Data Masters Europe, correct? As one of our coaches, I think.
Yes, I'm planning to come, but still have to validate a bit at home. But hopefully I can make it.
A great way for other people in the community to get to know you. And I think it's a wonderful beginning, and we're launching this year also in Amsterdam and Helsinki, so it will be it's been always a European kind of mission, and I think with these local chapters it's like characterizing what's the best about Europe, isn't it? Like the variety at the same time people coming together.
Yep. Okay, then thank you very much for being our host of our first historical podcast, and looking forward to our further many more discussions and collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you.